The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome from the General Assembly in the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. We have two members of the House of Delegates with us today. Delegate Lee Ware, welcome, sir.
Good morning.
And welcome Majority Leader Kirk Cox.
Thanks, Woody. It's always good to be with you.
So I know it's busy this session so far. We're into about the third week. Give us the lay of the land, if you will.
It's a long session, so it's the busier session because we have a two-year budget, so we do the budget this year. And the budget consumes everything as far as discussion, because if you think whether it be K-12 or higher education, policy is driven a lot by the money. So this is the longer session, but we have a whole host of issues. I know you're going to cover a lot of them. I know Lee is very involved in the uranium mining issue, but we have a whole host of issues. The other good thing about a democracy or a republic like ours is we have a lot of citizens visit. We've had days where I know I met probably with 5 or 6 individual groups today, and they let you know in a citizen legislature your views. So it's going to be a good session.
Great. And what committees do you have in addition to your responsibility as the majority leader?
Well, I'm not as powerful as this guy. He's got 4. I've only got 2. It's all I can handle, believe me. I'm on appropriations, where I'm the vice chairman. And I'm on rules, which is a fascinating committee, which actually the speaker chairs, the speaker of the House chair. So those are my 2 committees.
Great, great. And I know you have some legislation you are pursuing with reference to veterans.
That's always been a very big interest of mine. I feel like their service has been phenomenal and just what they dedicate to this country. And we always talk about core functions of government, which I know we're going to talk about today, but defense of the country I put as #1 priority. But I have 2 quickly. One is a lot of our veterans coming back, especially with the great armor we have today and the great equipment, have actually, it's interesting, it's great, it saves their lives, but a lot of times now we have a lot more coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder because of brain injury, because the equipment's so good, but still we have a lot of brain injury we didn't have in the past. And when they come back, obviously, they've earned those credits and those disability payments they should be getting. Sometimes it takes over a year to get those. And we have claims agents in Virginia that actually help them process these very complex claims and have a bill in that would lower the ratio for one claims agent for every 23,000 veterans. And the simple theory is we have 20 of these offices around Virginia. Some only have 1 claims agent. If he goes on vacation or he's sick, there's no one to even do your claim.
Well, only one.
So that's one. The other one is that we found out that in our sickness and disability program that we offset, if you have a military disability, we offset that, which I think is just fundamentally unfair. We're one of the only states that does that, which is unusual. Virginia is a very veterans-friendly state, so that's another veterans piece of legislation I have in.
Great. Delegate, where I know you're supportive of those issues, I wanted to ask you initially, however, to what extent has the geographic boundaries of your district been changed as a result of redistricting?
And let me piggyback on what you said, and many of us look to Kirk, who has been a champion for veterans issues through the years, and I'm delighted to see him continuing with that. My district has changed somewhat substantially. It does continue to include all of Powhatan County and a section of western Chesterfield, generally Midlothian, but it has added portions of western Goochland and eastern Fluvanna counties as well, so it's gone across the James River and added some new folks that I'm getting to know.
So a lot of new constituents to meet.
Yes, it is.
Great. Tell us about your committee assignments.
I serve on 4 committees. I am the vice chairman of Commerce and Labor, which deals with a variety of business-related issues and labor-related issues. I serve on the House Committee on Agriculture, Chesapeake Bay, and Natural Resources. I'm also on the Rules Committee with Kirk, and serve on a 4th, did I cover 4? 3.
Is it finance?
Finance is exactly it. Thank you, Woody. That's why we have you here. Finance
that was
Committee.
Good. Really quick.
Which deals with taxation.
Great, great. And I know you've been involved in an issue that's been highlighted in the news beginning last year and continuing this year, and that's uranium mining. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
I can probably tell you more than you and your viewers would want to know, but seriously, uranium is in the ground in Virginia, near Chatham, Virginia, Pittsylvania County, And there has been a renewed interest in it in recent years, and the legislature established a study committee about 2.5 years ago, and I've had the opportunity to serve as a chairman of that study committee looking at the issue of uranium mining. We have authorized 2 separate studies by organizations that do this kind of work. First, to study the social and economic effects that a uranium mine would have in that area. And then secondly, we were fortunate enough to get the National Academy of Sciences to undertake a major technical study of how that technology is today and what would be the things that would be necessary if we were to go forward to provide for the safety of the citizens, and can we do so? And I think those are all legitimate and important questions, not only for the folks who are close by, but for Virginians across the Commonwealth.
So the social and economic ramifications would include whether people would be displaced, for example, as a result of mining, and also the amount of revenues generated from any ventures?
Those are important elements of it. It deals with what kind of jobs would be created both by the mine and as offshoots from it. It deals with the question what kinds of resources would be necessary from public services, whether it be emergency services and so forth, from the communities that are affected. It also means how would agriculture be affected, or other important local institutions. There are several very significant private schools, for example, Chatham Hall in that area. Would they be affected in their ability to reach out to new students by having a mine of that nature in the neighborhood?
What does the law allow now?
Excellent question. About 30 years ago, Virginia took a very close look at uranium mining, and for a variety of reasons, including the cost of uranium declining and somewhat of a downturn in interest because of the events at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, we decided at that point to maintain a moratorium, and that remains in place to today. And so the thing that we've got to consider is whether we want to maintain that or whether we are willing to reconsider. And the governor, I think, has prudently gone forward. We sent him a letter asking him to develop regulations to see what it would look like if we were to go forward. And he has said he will go forward, has asked the relevant agencies to develop regulations. So we'll have a chance to take more time to look at it, for my colleagues to review the questions and make a decision probably in the 2013 session.
Great. We'll keep an eye on that legislation as it moves forward and to the studies, and please keep us informed in that regard. Okay. Delegate Cox, you are a school teacher, have been so for many years, very dedicated. I know you teach a government affairs class, among other things, and K through 12 is very important. What's the governor's package this year in terms of funding K through 12?
Actually, Lee and I are both school teachers, and we talk often about education issues. It's great to have a colleague and sort of bounce things off of. The governor's done 2 or 3 big things in K-12. Number one, probably his biggest priority was to try to put money into the teacher pension system. And that's a little bit of a complex issue because teachers really are local employees, but they're in the VRS system. And teachers, generally, our pension fund has been more underfunded than state employees. And teachers are one of your fastest growing, obviously, segments. I think they outnumber state employees now pretty substantially and local employees. So what the governor's basically said is that we need to shore up that system. I was afloat with the governor about 3 Fridays ago to New York to the bond rating agencies. And one of the questions they always ask you is, talk about your pension fund, talk about your unfunded liability, and talk about what you're doing to correct that. So one of the things the governor's doing is he's putting about $2 billion towards the retirement fund. Part of that state share, obviously state employees, it's all state share, but for teachers, it's basically a 1/3 state contribution, 2/3 local contribution. So that's a very big issue. And it's interesting, some people, when they talk about K-12, don't give the governor credit for that. They take that out of the equation. They go, well, he's underfunded K-12, and they don't talk about what he's done in pensions. The other big things in K-12 are some reform efforts, everything from going from 7 diplomas to 3, to doing more with what we call dual enrollment, where kids are basically trying to get college credit and actually take the courses at the high school. He's looking actually to have some kids where they could have almost their entire 2-year associate's degree in high school. And then, of course, you have issues dealing with charter schools. School choice is going to be a very big issue. Delegate Massey has a bill in that would basically say that for those on free lunch or reduced free lunch, they would have an opportunity basically to get one of these tax credits and take it to a private school, especially if they weren't doing well in a public school. So that's another hot issue in K-12. And of course, that's right now the governor's got about $10 million in the budget for that.
Great. Competition in schools is a good thing, I take it.
You know, I think we all do better when we're pushed, whether it's on the playing fields or whether it's in business. And I think there is an element where school choice does provide that opportunity. It gives many choices. I've sometimes used I don't quote Mao very often, but he said, "Let 1,000 flowers bloom." And I really do think when you have more choices, you do have more opportunities, and the more that's available for parents and children, the better. And if I could continue just a little bit on education, as Kirk said, we both teach, and one of the first bills that I carried in was to restore control of the calendar to local school divisions. And it's
the King's Dominion.
You got it. And it looks like we'll have a push this year to repeal that control from Richmond of the calendar. Many localities, and I think quite appropriately, have been able to get a waiver because of weather conditions or for testing for their students. And that's a testimony to the fact that the decisions ought to be made at the local level. And I think so many times we have taken away educational decisions from the place where they ought to occur, between the parents, the principal, the teacher, the school board at the local level. So often they can take into account things that we simply can't take into account in Richmond, let alone in Washington.
As a matter of fact, there's so many school districts that get waivers now, the exceptions almost swallow the existing law.
There are more that are getting waivers than there are not.
Yeah. Now, what about community colleges? They have become critical, especially in this recessionary era that we find ourselves in. Students can't afford our institutions of higher learning, and we have a lot of adults who are now unemployed and need transition with new skills. Talk to us about the importance of community colleges.
You've really touched on a critical part of our educational arrangements, and they are busting at the seams. I know John Tyler Community College in my area is just full. And one of the students there is my own daughter. And the same kind of thing. She's going back to enhance her skills, to broaden her ability in accounting. And she's one of dozens of students that Kirk and I both see that go back. It's affordable. They can continue to live at home, or they can continue with their family life, such as it may be. They are tremendous. They offer tremendous flexibility in the time and in the opportunity, and they're a wonderful part of our educational options for students in Virginia.
Great. In terms of workforce development, attracting new employers, ensuring that those that are here stay here, we've got to develop a base of new employees.
It's interesting, you know, when you're talking about, and it can be controversial, incentives to businesses to come, one of the first things they will ask you is about your community college system, because so much of the training, as you say, whether it be at DuPont or whatever, they'll train at John Tyler at the big center. And so they're absolutely crucial. And Lee makes a great point. They're also affordable. And so one of the things we've put in the last few years is called a transfer grant. And basically what we say is that if you're a community college student and you go to a community college and then you transfer to a four-year institution, we'll give you a $1,000 grant. Now you have to keep a B average, and there's some other stipulations that you have to do. But that's a great incentive to really help us out. We have tried the last several years to put an emphasis on higher ed, even in our four-year and our two-year institutions, by really giving them incentives to do things we think will really improve, such as using your facilities year-round, using technology better. You know, Cisco's doing a project right now with UVA Tech, James Madison, and George Mason, where they're basically using incredible interactive technology as far as teaching goes, where you can have a host university teach several courses.
So distance learning and the ability to take advantage of renowned professors and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's a big emphasis of what we're doing. And STEM, obviously your engineering, your math, we call it STEM-H because it's also the health professions. We put a real emphasis on that, and as a matter of fact, we'll give that community college student a $2,000 grant if he's a STEM major. So there's a lot of emphasis on that also.
Now, what about institutions of higher learning? What over the last 10 years tuition has doubled? That's obviously a problem. We have a lot of out-of-state students who some suggest are subsidizing what's going on here in the Commonwealth. That's not a bad thing, but how do we address those issues?
We've addressed them. The governor has close to $200 million in this budget for higher ed. At $100 million last year. It's just not, money never addresses a problem totally, but we've tried to put it in strategic places. And I've met with the governor on this issue, and he has really stepped up. The higher ed presidents have had a lot of input into what he's doing, but he's told them all that tuition is not affordable, especially for middle-class families. And he expects tuition this year not to be in the double digits. He expects it to be in the 3 or 4% range. So hopefully parents are going to look at that moderating greatly over what it's been because of our commitment to higher ed. He's also told the colleges and universities, you've got to take 3% of your, basically your base operation and put it back towards these priorities, not administration, but towards STEM and towards, these types of things that hopefully advance the ball. So they like that. I think it's a nice marriage between the college presidents and government.
So science, technology, engineering, math, and healthcare, that's the wave of the future, it appears.
There's certainly been a tremendous emphasis on that, and when you look at where the job opportunities are, I think many of them are related to that. And I think, as Kirk suggests, I think one of the things that we've seen, and I think there's been a tremendous cooperative effort in this instance with the college presidents and the administration, of looking at what are our core functions. What do we need to do? Our resources we know are limited. What do we need to focus on? And I think this, if there's a silver lining in the economic difficulties we're facing, it's the obligation and the opportunity together to look at what do we need to do? What's job one?
The majority leader mentioned a meeting in New York recently regarding the AAA bond rating, bond rating that the Commonwealth continues to enjoy. Why is that important?
It's important, obviously, because the rates that we get come from the rating that we have. We're one of, the last time I knew, 7 states that maintain this, and that's quite a feather in our cap, both because it says we are doing the job that we need to do of maintaining a structurally balanced budget, but that we're recognized by independent outside observers for doing that. And of course it keeps the rate down, so we're not spending what we might in interest, and we can put it to our priorities for spending.
And of course that allowed the Commonwealth last year to use its bonding authority to help in terms of transportation.
It did. It was a very substantial infusion of transportation, and that's going to be an ongoing challenge. I think that facing up to our transportation and maintenance needs is going to be a significant thing for us, and I'm not sure we've solved that. I think we've taken steps, and I think the governor has again put something on the plate for us to look at in that regard with a sliver of the sales tax, and I think we're going to have to look at that. I think we are going to have to look very carefully at how we can find ongoing funding for transportation.
So I assume there was a positive meeting in New York with the rating agencies?
It went very well. It was interesting. What they really want to, cash is king. What they want to know, number one, is what are your reserves? They want to know, and Lee makes a great point, how structurally balanced is your budget? Where are your gimmicks at, et cetera. And we have done generally very well on that. We'll have $600 million in the rainy day fund by 2014, and that's our set-aside fund that basically, helps us, especially in recession. The governor's put about $50 million in what he calls a federal fact fund that will hopefully mitigate any federal cuts, and that's a very good idea. We have a decent unappropriated balance, and they're really looking for those things. The one problem we face, though, is, and it's frustrating because there's very little you can do about it, is our proximity to Washington. They will ding you on, what federal cuts are coming down, and even if you've planned very well, that's a problem. For example, Standard & Poor's, one of the rating, and Fitch, both, of course, give us a pure AAA. Moody's put us on watch, and what was interesting about Moody's was that they couldn't have been more complimentary. So you run your state beautifully, but we're going to wait and see what the federal government does that affects you, and basically saying there's not much you can do about that. And that part's frustrating. You try to sort of walk through them. It depends on where the cuts come. If the cuts come more in social services, Virginia would frankly make out fairly well. If the cuts come in other areas, a little bit tougher, but there's some circumstances I don't think they always look at. For example, a lot of the ships that are being decommissioned, that work will actually be in Hampton Roads. And it's not counterintuitive, but actually we get a lot of jobs from that. So you have to look down into the details before you make that
So the
decision.
looming potential for defense cuts is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, it's certainly not good, but there are certain elements of it, as you're right. Some of those are long-term contracts that, of course, won't affect you that much because they're contracts. And some of the procurement in Northern Virginia you have to watch out for. The governor is very interested in trying to make sure that some of those industries can convert. If you're doing model and simulation, for example, for defense, can you do it for transportation, other things?
Those are very important issues. How do we maintain the friendly business environment that we currently enjoy in order to keep employers here and, more importantly, attract new ones?
And Woody, some of the legislation that I carry this year relates specifically to that, being on the Committee of Commerce and Labor. And as you say, we have been held up as one of the states that really does make an effort to make sure that businesses have a climate in which they can operate, a prepared workforce, a regulatory and taxation environment that is not overwhelming as it is in some states, and the kind of support that's needed for both businesses that are here and attracting new jobs to Virginia. We've worked hard at that, and I think we're going to continue to. Several of the bills that I have speak to some of those issues, and I enjoy that element of commerce and labor, making sure that we maintain the viability of our business climate.
Great, and of course you're going to be dealing with the budget just like everyone else. Kirk is going to be dealing with it more than anyone else. How do you see that all working out?
Well, these have been challenging years, and while Virginia has, I think, positioned itself carefully, and we've not spent as some of our sister states have in a variety of areas, so we've been able to weather some of the things that other states are really having a difficult time with because of that careful and generally conservative view of both spending and finance. But it's the challenge. There are a number of specific agencies that have had to see downturns, cuts in what they get. And I think our challenge is going to be to decide where we need to restore, what we can do to restore, and again, maintain that conservative approach.
Talk about a challenge. You just held a press conference about the budget. Tell us about it.
We actually held a press conference about the budget process. And of course, you have the bill goes to the House, and obviously the Senate works on their bill, and they cross over. And basically, we try to work out the differences through what's called a conference committee, a certain number of House members, a certain number of Senate members. And that process needs to be fixed. I mean, for years, that process has been a bit bumpy, even though we got the budget out last year, 100-0. One example is the budget's basically due to both bodies back on March the 6th. And that's very important because that gives staff 48 hours to print the budget and then 48 hours for folks to look at it. We haven't hit that March 6th deadline since I've, frankly, been a conferee. And we need to. And we tell people we're going to try to do that. We need to do it. And just things like trying to work together on both sides, Senate and House, before the bills cross over to work out differences, better communication. We actually had a press conference with the Senate saying we're going to be more successful this year. The budget's the big thing. We can be better on cooperation. We want to look less and less and less and less like Washington. We do that in most circumstances, we can do a better job.
Of course, there's an interesting challenge on the Senate side this year because of the split, and I believe the Lieutenant Governor has conceded that he does not have the tie vote on budget matters.
So it's always an interesting question for those of us who follow the Constitution and teach the Constitution. Let me mention one other thing, though, about what Kirk said about the budget process. Doing it as the process, as he's described it, is a tremendous plus for all those groups that are looking to us to make their own budgets. Every locality wonders, what are we going to get for our police and sheriff's departments? What are we going to get for social services? And if there's a timely decision, that has a tremendous positive effect for localities as well. But you're right, the Senate with the 2020 split and the Lieutenant Governor sort of judiciously deciding what could and could not be done constitutionally as a voter in that is going to be interesting.
We haven't talked about transportation just a little bit in passing, at least in terms of the sales tax that the governor wants to shift a small amount to help transportation. What kinds of transportation issues are you hearing about from your constituents?
Woody, I do hear from people who are concerned about what the roads look like. They do see the potholes. They do see the surface beginning to fade, and I think there's a concern, a growing concern about maintenance over the long term. And I think it's one of the if it's not the most, it's one of the most important issues for us to address over the long term. I don't know that any of us has come up with the right answer to it. One that's interesting, the road builders have looked at a new fair share program which would bring in all the different kinds of electric and natural gas as well as the current gas tax, and bring in all those vehicles into the supply chain, both for funding as well as for being on the roads. And I think that bears looking at as one option. As cars get more efficient, the gas tax revenue stalls or goes down, and that's the challenge that we face. The costs continue to rise, and the income is stagnant.
We already have tolls, maybe more, but no taxes.
No, and in this climate, I would not support a tax increase. But I think Lee does hit on a good point. I mean, maintenance is a core responsibility, but it's interesting, and we do need a long-term solution. But it's interesting. I did a teletown hall meeting with my constituents, had about 1,200 on the line. I asked them, these are 5 areas of the budget, please rate: K-12, higher ed, health, transportation, and public safety. And transportation rate at 3%, which I thought was fascinating, of the 5. Now, if you go to Northern Virginia, you'll get a much higher thing. That doesn't mean we don't need to address it, but we have done some things I think people have forgotten about. We put 2/3 of the surplus now towards transportation, and now I think he is actually asked to ramp that up to 3/4. I think in some cases tolling is a good idea, in other cases it's not. I like the hot lane proposal with variable tolling. I think that
that's
has
the high occupancy.
Yeah, the high occupancy. Exactly right. And basically, I think that way that would work is if you still have like 3 people, then you go for free. But if not, it's variable. It depends on the time of day, et cetera. And that's an interesting concept that's been tried in other places. But Lee is right. I mean, even with currently it's a 1/2 cent, obviously sales tax for transportation, the governor would eventually every 8 years phase that into 3/4 cent. And I do think transportation is a core function of government, so that's a legitimate proposal, but that gets you about $110 million a year, and that, of course, doesn't close totally a $400 million maintenance shortfall, so we'll have to think of other things to address along that line.
Health care, there's a matter being debated as a result of the Affordable Care Act, or some people like to call it Obamacare.
Right.
Relates to the creation of exchanges. I believe the governor has indicated he'd rather wait to see what the U.S. Supreme Court does sometime this term. Where are you on that issue?
And I think the governor is being prudent about that. I think we also have the obligation to be prudent on that question as well. Under that Affordable Care Act, states have the option of setting up their own health care exchange or simply opting into the federal health care exchange. And again, decisions I think generally are better made closer to home with the unique circumstances, the unique framework here. So we have several measures in, and whether or not the legislature actually enacts one, I think we will have the committee process work those over and see what are the priorities. Do we want to put this in the State Corporation Commission? Do we want to have a freestanding agency that would review this, or how do we go forward? And I think the legislature will and should weigh in on that, whether or not we actually pass one this session or hold off on the judicial decision we all expect later this year.
Great, we're out of time. Thank you for being here, Delegate Kirk Cox, Delegate Ware. Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.